Sixpence coin 1954. Queen Elizabeth II, United Kingdom. The British Sixpence coin of 1954 is a fascinating piece of United Kingdom numismatic history. Struck during the early years of the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, this small silver-colored coin represents an important period of transition in Britain. The year 1954 came only 2 years after Elizabeth II became queen, following the death of her father, King George VI, in February 1952. Although the sixpence was a small denomination, it played an important role in everyday British life for many generations. The coin was commonly used for small purchases, household expenses, and traditional customs. The 1954 issue therefore provides collectors with a physical connection to post-war Britain and the beginning of the Elizabethan era. Britain in 1954. To understand the history of the 1954 sixpence, it is useful to look at Britain during the early 1950s. The country was still recovering from the effects of the Second World War. Although the war had ended in 1945, Britain continued to experience economic difficulties, rationing, and shortages during the following years. By 1954, however, Britain was beginning to experience a period of greater optimism. Food rationing was gradually coming to an end, and the country was entering a new era under Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth II had become queen in 1952 while visiting Kenya after learning of her father's death. Her coronation took place in Westminster Abbey on June 2, 1953. The 1954 sixpence was therefore one of the early coins produced during her reign. For collectors, this makes the date particularly interesting. It belongs to the first decade of Elizabeth II's reign, when the British monarchy and the nation's coinage were beginning a new chapter. The British Sixpence. The sixpence was traditionally written as 6d. Under Britain's old pre-decimal monetary system, there were 12 pence in 1 shilling and 20 shillings in 1 pound. Therefore, sixpence equals 6 old pence. Sixpence equals 1/2 of a shilling. Sixpence equals 1/40th of a pound. The sixpence was much smaller in value than the pound, but it was an important everyday coin. Before decimalization, British people were accustomed to thinking about money in pounds, shillings, and pence. A sixpence was a familiar part of the system. Design of the 1954 sixpence. The 1954 sixpence carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. This was the first portrait of Elizabeth II used on British circulating coins. The portrait was designed by Mary Gillick, a British sculptor and medalist. Her design became one of the most recognizable representations of the young queen. Elizabeth II is shown facing to the right. Her portrait is youthful and elegant, reflecting her appearance at the beginning of her reign. Around the portrait are inscriptions identifying the queen and her title. The reverse of the sixpence features the traditional British design associated with the denomination. The coin carries a crowned royal shield surrounded by a wreath, with the denomination represented by the wording sixpence. The combination of the young queen's portrait and the traditional reverse design created a clear link between Britain's new monarch and its long-established monetary traditions. Mary Gillick and the young queen. Mary Gillick played an important role in British coin history. Born in 1881, Gillick became a respected sculptor and medal designer. When Elizabeth II came to the throne, Gillick was selected to create the new portrait of the young queen for British coinage. Her portrait appeared on British coins for many years. The Gillick portrait is especially important because it represents Elizabeth II at the beginning of her reign. Later portraits showed the queen at different stages of her life, but the Gillick portrait captured the young monarch who had just inherited the throne. For collectors, early Elizabeth II coins bearing the Gillick portrait are therefore historically significant. Metal and physical characteristics. The sixpence had a long history as a silver coin, but by the time of Elizabeth II's reign its composition had changed. Earlier British sixpences had been made from silver. However, Britain's post-war economic circumstances led to major changes in the composition of circulating coins. The Elizabeth II Sixpence was made from copper-nickel rather than traditional silver. Copper-nickel is an alloy primarily composed of copper and nickel. This change is important for collectors because a 1954 sixpence should not automatically be considered a silver coin simply because older sixpences were silver. The coin was small, durable, and suitable for everyday circulation. Its relatively modest size reflected its low monetary value, but the coin's compact design made it convenient for carrying and handling. Why the sixpence was important. The sixpence was more than just a piece of metal. It was part of everyday British culture. For many people, sixpence had practical value. It could be used for small purchases and was frequently included in children's allowances and household transactions. The coin also became associated with traditions and sayings. One of the most famous British customs involving the sixpence is the wedding tradition of placing a silver sixpence in the bride's shoe. The traditional rhyme says, "Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and a silver sixpence in her shoe." This tradition helped give the sixpence a cultural importance beyond its monetary value. Although the custom dates from earlier generations, the sixpence remained strongly associated with good luck and prosperity during the 20th century. The sixpence and British culture. The sixpence also appeared in literature, songs, sayings, and popular culture. For generations of British people, the word sixpence immediately brought memories of childhood, shopping, pocket money, and traditional celebrations. The coin was small enough to become a familiar part of daily life, yet distinctive enough to have a strong identity. This is one reason why collectors today are interested not only in the physical characteristics of the sixpence, but also in the stories connected with it. A 1954 sixpence can therefore be viewed as both a monetary object and a cultural artifact. Elizabeth II early reign. The 1954 coin belongs to an important stage of Queen Elizabeth II reign. Elizabeth II was only in her 20s when she became queen. Britain was entering a new generation, and the young monarch became a symbol of continuity and renewal. Her reign would eventually become one of the longest in British history. But in 1954, the future was still unknown. The young queen was beginning her constitutional responsibilities, traveling throughout the Commonwealth, meeting world leaders, and establishing herself as Britain's monarch. The coins produced during these early years therefore have a special historical character. They represent the beginning of a reign that would continue for more than 7 decades. Britain's post-war economy. The 1954 sixpence also reflects Britain's economic history. The Second World War placed enormous financial pressure on Britain. The country had borrowed heavily and faced significant reconstruction challenges. Coinage was affected by these economic circumstances. Precious metals became increasingly expensive and strategically important, leading Britain to move away from silver for many everyday denominations. The sixpence was part of this broader transformation. Instead of being made from silver, it became a base metal coin suitable for mass circulation. For collectors, this change illustrates how coinage is closely connected to economics. Coins are not designed in isolation. Their size, metal, appearance, and value can all be influenced by national economic conditions. How the coin was used. A 1954 sixpence would have been used in shops, markets, public transportation, and everyday transactions. People at the time would not necessarily have thought of the coin as a collectible object. It was simply money. A person might receive a sixpence as change from a purchase, keep it in a purse or pocket, or spend it shortly afterward. Children might save sixpences as part of their pocket money. Because the coin circulated widely, many surviving examples show signs of wear. This makes the condition of individual 1954 sixpence coins particularly important today. Collecting the 1954 sixpence. Modern collectors often examine several factors when evaluating a 1954 sixpence. The first is condition. Coins that circulated for many years can have scratches, surface marks, edge damage, and worn details. A coin with sharp design elements and minimal wear is generally more desirable to collectors than a heavily circulated example. The second factor is authenticity. Because old coins can be misidentified or incorrectly described, collectors should examine the coin carefully and, when necessary, consult a reputable numismatic expert. The third factor is rarity. A coin does not automatically become extremely valuable simply because it is old. The number originally produced, survival rate, condition, demand, and unusual varieties can all influence collector interest. Condition grades. Collectors commonly describe coin condition using grading terms. A heavily circulated sixpence may show considerable wear, with important design details becoming less distinct. A coin in better circulated condition may still show clear details of Elizabeth II portrait and the reverse design. Uncirculated examples are more desirable because they have little or no evidence of circulation. Coins with particularly attractive surfaces, strong details, and minimal marks can attract greater interest. Professional grading services may assign numerical grades to exceptional examples. However, collectors should remember that grading is only one part of determining desirability. Is the 1954 sixpence valuable? One of the most common questions about old British coins is whether they are worth a large amount of money. The answer depends on the specific coin. A 1954 sixpence is historically interesting, but ordinary circulated examples are generally not automatically rare or extremely valuable. Collectors should be cautious of internet claims suggesting that every old sixpence is worth hundreds or thousands of pounds. The actual value of a coin depends on its condition, authenticity, rarity, demand, and current collector market. A coin in ordinary circulated condition may have relatively modest collector value, while an unusually well-preserved or special example could be more desirable. Errors and varieties. Another area of interest for collectors is coin errors. During minting, coins can occasionally develop unusual characteristics. These may include striking problems, off-center strikes, doubling, planchet errors, or other manufacturing abnormalities. However, not every unusual-looking mark is a genuine mint error. Damage caused after the coin left the mint can sometimes be mistaken for an error. For this reason, anyone who believes they have a rare 1954 sixpence should compare it with reliable references or have it examined by a professional numismatist. The end of the sixpence. The sixpence continued to circulate for many years after 1954. Britain eventually decided to change from the old pounds, shillings, and pence system to decimal currency. Decimalization took place on February 15, 1971, a day commonly known as Decimal Day. The new system divided £1 into 100 new pence. The old sixpence therefore belonged to a monetary system that eventually disappeared. The sixpence itself continued to have a complicated relationship with decimalization and remained in circulation for a period afterward before finally being withdrawn. Today, the coin is remembered primarily as part of Britain's pre-decimal monetary heritage. Historical importance of the 1954 date. The year 1954 gives this sixpence special historical context. It was produced just 1 year after Queen Elizabeth II coronation. Britain was moving beyond the immediate post-war years. Rationing was coming to an end, society was changing, and a new generation was beginning to experience a more optimistic period. The young Queen's portrait on the coin reflected the beginning of a new Elizabethan age. At the same time, The traditional design of the sixpence connected the new reign with centuries of British monetary history. This combination makes the 1954 sixpence an interesting snapshot of its time. A small coin with a big story. The sixpence may be physically small, but its story is remarkably large. It connects several important themes in British history: monarchy, economics, post-war recovery, coin design, everyday life, and cultural tradition. The portrait of Queen Elizabeth II reminds us of the beginning of a historic reign. The denomination reminds us of Britain's old monetary system. The metal composition reflects economic changes after the Second World War. The traditional associations of the sixpence demonstrate how money can become part of national culture. For collectors, these connections can make an ordinary-looking coin much more fascinating. Conclusion: the 1954 British sixpence is an important example of early Elizabeth II coinage. Produced during the first years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, it captures Britain at a moment of major transition. The country was recovering from war, moving toward economic stability, and beginning a new chapter under a young monarch. Its obverse carries Mary Gillick's portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, one of the most famous early representations of the Queen on British coins. Its traditional reverse design preserves the familiar character of the sixpence denomination. Although the coin was worth only 6 old pence when it circulated, its historical significance today is much greater. It represents a vanished monetary system, a changing Britain, and the beginning of one of the most remarkable royal reigns in modern history. For anyone interested in British coins, the 1954 sixpence is an excellent example of how a small, everyday object can preserve an entire chapter of history. When a collector holds a 1954 sixpence today, they are not simply holding an old coin. They are holding a piece of early Elizabethan Britain, a time when the country was rebuilding after war, adapting to a new monarch, and looking toward the future. That is what makes the 1954 sixpence so fascinating. A tiny coin with a story that reaches across generations.